Thank you, Alfonso. My name is Andrea Margit, and like many of you, I co-lead the Everyone a Changemaker movement in Latin America. I speak today from the city of São Paulo, that once was the domain of the Atlantic forests and the habitat of the tree that gave Brazil its name. Today, I have the great honor of introducing Dr. Vandana Shiva. Dr. Shiva holds a PhD in physics, but she's best known as an environmental activist, a seed saver, and an ecofeminist. She is a leading advocate of food sovereignty, agroecology, and farmers' rights. She authored numerous books, including Water Wars, Soil Not Oil, Earth Democracy, Who Really Feeds the World, and the Oneness versus the 1%. A native of India, Dr. Shiva is a founding member of Navdanya, an earth-centric, women-centric, and farmers-led movement for the protection of biological and cultural diversity. She shares with us the passion of working for the good of all, for justice, for peace. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shiva to Latin America Changemakers United. How are you, Dr. Shiva, and where are you speaking from?
I'm in my childhood home in Dehradun, in the Himalaya, in India. I got locked down here, and I'm grateful this is where I got locked down and not somewhere else.
Dr. Shiva, we would like to begin by talking about your journey as an activist and a social leader. The realization that you can't wait for the change to happen is a crucial moment in the lives of people like you and like us, social entrepreneurs. When did you realize you had to be the change? What problems were you trying to solve, and how did you start designing system-changing solutions?
I was woken up to basically my need to give my life to protecting the earth and serving communities when I saw a forest I had walked through as a child disappear. I had visited it just before going to Canada to do my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory. And I wanted to carry this stream, this forest with me. It was oak forest, and it gone. It was like part of me had got amputated. And that's when I started to look and found there was an amazing movement that was starting to grow of women coming out to hug trees. They called it Chipko, which means to hug. It was the beginning of my commitment. I couldn't stay there. I had to go to Canada, but I took a pledge. I'd come back every vacation, summer, winter. And that's why I believe each of us can be a change, no matter who we are and what we are doing. We have no excuse because we do have weekends. We have time after work, and all our spare moment, instead of being spent on going to a shopping mall, should be spent in healing the earth. But my next wake-up call was 1984. I had done my MSc honors in particle physics in the state of Punjab, very prosperous state, in a city called Chandigarh, where the Punjab University is. And it was a peaceful state, a powerful state. By 84, it had erupted in violence. And I was working for the United Nations Universities program on peace and global transformation, heading a project called Conflicts Over Natural Resources. And I wrote to the UNU, I said, something's going on in these conflicts that need to be understood. And can you let me do this as part of the conflicts program? I was looking at forest conflicts and river conflicts and something that was happening all around us, and that's something that's happening so severely in Latin America right now, with the burning of the Amazon, the spraying of glyphosate everywhere. So I did the study, and it became the book called The Violence of the Green Revolution. I then took a pledge. I have to be part of a non-violent farming revolution. I didn't know anything except I'd grown up on my mother's farm, but it was fun, you know, it was like a holiday. Now I had to start learning, and I did. And as you notice, so many of my books in the last 36 years have been around food and agriculture. Something I've, my lessons have come from nature, from peasants, from farmers. And then the final wake-up call, 87, where the companies that had brought agrotoxins now said, we want to own the seed. And I was at this meeting on the new biotechnology. And they talked about how they will do genetic engineering to take patents and impose it on the world. So I said, but you don't invent a seed, Seed evolves, it's self-organized. I'll say seeds. That's how Navdanya started. I said, I'm going to work with my government. We still had sovereign governments that were committed to their people. People forget that the kind of governments we have today weren't there in the 80s. Latin America had just come out of a horrible period of dictatorship and democracy was thriving. And my government, Brazil's government, Argentinian government, governments all over said, you cannot have an intellectual property agreement where you allow life to be patented and they work together to create an exemption. So I started to look at intellectual property. I started to look at WTO and GATT and globalization. And that's what I've done since then. I realized I had to be the change I want to see on the issue of biodiversity and seed. Non-violent farming, protecting the earth, learning from nature, learning from peasants. What I've learned in these many years is humility. Because you grow up as a physicist being taught, you're the smartest thing, top. If today you're an engineer or you're in Wall Street. But in my time, we used to be told, if you're smart, you do physics. And of course, the arrogance gets to you. And to be a good change maker, you have to have humility, to know there are others. There's plants with intelligence. There's microbes with intelligence. There's indigenous people who have the intelligence for humanity to survive. So we are living in bad times, but fascinating times in terms of the possibilities of being the change you want to see. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. You say that we are witnessing multiple pandemics simultaneously. The first is the coronavirus we are learning about. The second is the hunger pandemic. The third is the destruction of livelihoods around the world that's going on for decades. To your view, is this the doomsday or an opportunity to reshape food systems and regenerate economies?
Well, all three pandemics have their roots in a model of neoliberal global economy of corporate rule and deregulation, whether it's deregulation of environmental laws, otherwise why would the Amazon be burning? Rio is where the Earth Summit was organized to create the laws of governing our sustainability, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the precautionary principle, the polluter pays principles, that has been deregulated through the greed of corporations. So, of course, they then pushed into forests, created the pandemic, turned food into a commodity, created hunger. It's not that we aren't growing enough grain, but the GMO soya of the Amazon or Argentina, 90% is growing for biofuel and animal feed. And then the whole issue of destruction of livelihoods, if you think of it. What is the fossil fuel age of the last 400 years? Redefine economy to say if people work, something is unproductive. When you get rid of people, you have efficiency and productivity. And I call this the fossilization of our minds and our heart through a thinking of substitution, that people should be gotten rid of. Why do we have natural packaging? Plastic should come. Why do we have biodiversity to control pests? Pesticides should come. These used to be the indicators of development in the 70s, 80s, when I used to look at development reports of the World Bank and IMF. So if we continue to follow on this path, which is a colonial path, it began with colonialism. It mutated in different forms of colonialism. Then apocalypse is inevitable. Collapse is inevitable. And the IPCC has said we have 10 years to make a change. Otherwise, in 100 years, the conditions on this planet will make it impossible to live. And for those who are still saying, no, conditions are wonderful, look at the forest fires in California. Look at the cyclone. I mean, my country gets more intense cyclones than ever historically. Longer droughts. And now the rain isn't stopping. So all kinds of climate extremes, because we have disturbed the metabolic systems of the earth as Gaia, as a self-regulating system. So we can't afford to carry on that path. And it is a moment of promise for redefining and reinventing the food system, because the current system is not just responsible for 50% of greenhouse gases, it's responsible for the pandemics, it's responsible for the chronic diseases, which is making the pandemic worse in terms of mortality. It is responsible for desertification. You know, the Amazon burning is going to leave a desert, because that forest creates its soil, that forest creates a climate, that forest creates its amazing water cycle and hydrological cycle. So desertification, water scarcity, extinction. You know, if you see, where is extinction coming from? If you have herbicides and pesticides to drive species to extinction, of course you'll have extinction. And it hasn't done a good job feeding people. It is time to make a shift. My work over the last 30 years, it's really done with a love for the earth, a recognition that our farmers were brilliant farmers, from where organic farming went to the world, where permaculture went to the world, where biodynamics went to the world, all these new schools of ecological agriculture. It's the small peasants who practice it. And all my research has shown we can feed 2 times the world's population with good nutrition by conserving our biodiversity, working with the forest. That's how Amazonian indigenous people worked. Their farms and forests were one continuum. Our farms in India for 40 centuries were forests. Australian Aboriginal people farmed for 60,000 years. That's half the life of humanity on this planet. And that amazing knowledge is there to be tapped, added with agroecology, the new sciences. My work shows so much promise through basically the research we've done, the work we've done with our farmers. And if 50% of greenhouse gases, 75% of desertification, 90% of extinction comes from a toxic system, let us get rid of both the toxicity of the materials they use, but also the toxic mind that doesn't know how to think in terms of relationships.
I want to go back in your literature and talk about the knowledge that we want to tap in. In Monocultures of the Mind, one of your most famous and popular books in Latin America, you discuss the disappearance of local knowledge through its interaction with the globalizing dominant systems of production, consumption, and learning. But you warn us of the underlying trick. The dominant system is also a local system based on particular culture, class, and set of values that are imposed as universal traditions, as if they were intrinsically superior to local systems. How do we trigger this cognitive shift? How do we decolonize the mind? How do we restore self-determination?
To decolonize the mind and to make the cognitive shift away from monocultures of the mind to ecological minds, away from mechanistic minds, to biodiversity mind, you don't really have to be an indigenous person in the Amazon. Let's not forget that my early training in non-separation came from quantum theory. It's just that I then stretched it to understand the forest, to understand agriculture, to understand the relationship between soils and plants and our health. So I think this literal concept that you have to be in a forest to think ecologically is irresponsible. Ecological thinking is a duty, and all it means is A, understanding the processes of colonization, and the colonization of the mind, which means understanding your histories. And second, understanding the best of worldviews and thinking, no matter where it comes from. A new book maybe on interrelatedness and interconnectedness, connectedness between the soil and our gut microbiome, or the new thinking that's coming from the fact that microbes make us. And that's one reason the pandemic, the response to the pandemic is a bit crazy, because now, first indigenous people were made enemies who had to be exterminated. And they were. Jews and others who were considered inferior by Hitler were seen as a threat. They were exterminated, and all agrotoxins have their roots in Hitler's Germany, including the synthetic fertilizers. And if everyone still wants to deny it, just think of the Beirut blast, which killed more than 200 people and has absolutely destroyed Lebanon. It was ammonium nitrate, also used as an explosive, also used as a synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. These ideas of superiority come from a militarized mind, because when you have a oneness of the mind, you realize everything is connected and then nothing superior. A microbe isn't like us in size, but it is more significant in keeping us alive. And we are mainly microbes anyway, in the gut, on our skin, and we are walking microbes. The monoculture of the mind was very consciously constructed to support and justify colonialism. The first round with Columbus, who lost his way to the Americas while coming to India, it was really the justification was the unique culture of a particular religion, the church in Europe, and a particular color of the skin, whiteness. So if you look at the papal bull and you look at the Columbus letter pattern, it says, wherever you find places where white Christian princes don't rule, take it over on our behalf. That's superiority. And that's a particular culture elevated to be civilizers to wipe out local cultures, but local people and local species. But then we had 100 years later, the rise of the Anglo-Saxon Empire, the rise of the East India Company. And by then they had the Bacons and the Boyles, and they had the Hobbes and the Locks constructing and the structure. And sadly, this is what we teach our children as political science, as property. What did Bacon say? Bacon said the idea that the earth is living has to be destroyed. I will give birth to a masculine birth of time through a knowledge of subjugation of nature, through a whole new conquest of nature, by tearing her secrets out, not working with her gently. It's all in this book, The Masculine Birth of Time. And this then created this monoculture of the mind, where a bunch of rich men were looking at how to get richer, but used religion, knowledge to colonize. My work has really been based all these years on telling these guys, you know so little. Your reductionist monoculture of the mind is such a narrow window to the world. And then you deny life on earth. You deny knowledge of other people. Decolonization begins by recognizing the earth is alive. It begins by recognizing the earth is full of life, of biodiversity, starting to realize we are co-creators and co-producers with this rich biodiversity, starting to have respect for all people, irrespective of the gender, the religion, the color of the skin, the faith. This is how we will decolonize. It has to go to the mind.
Your latest book has many parallels to the monocultures of the mind. The flow of wealth from the pockets of the bottom 90% to the coffers of the top 1% has becoming increasingly evident and debated in public circles. As we see in daily news accounts, such levels of inequality give rise to social unrest, violent behavior, polarization, and mainly depression in people being abandoned in their own nations, considered useless or irrelevant as they can't work or find a job. This problem is central to Ashoka and to our community of social entrepreneurs, because we know that to reverse such a dynamic, we must be able to create a ground-up movement that can raise and bring together the next generation of changemakers. And these changemakers will have to stand up in every corner of the world and lead the change with confidence and ethical fiber. You have recently published a book entitled Oneness versus the 1%. Can you talk more about this book and how could it help a new world emerge?
The idea of writing a book on oneness versus the 1% really began. I was at the climate summit in Paris in 2015, and on the stage with the heads of state were Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg giving instructions to governments of what they should be doing. Giving instructions that geoengineering, deliberately changing the climate of the world, genetic engineering, finance, technology were going to be the solutions to a problem which was really, we've messed up our relationship with the earth, and we can't correct that bad relationship with more of that bad relationship. I started to try and figure out how this tiny bunch of people had become so powerful. So the book is really an exploration of how in the last decade, really, the power wealth into the hands of the 10 billionaires in the technology fields, or those like Amazon who use platforms to destroy real work. And even during the pandemic, Jeff Bezos increased his wealth by $64 billion. Yeah. People lost work, people lost livelihoods. The shutdown benefited them. Also during the pandemic, so much of what I've written in the book, I've talked about the attempt to digitalize every aspect of life, because in India, 2016, we went through a terrible attack on cash. 90% of our economy was destroyed. 3 days later, Bill Gates was here to celebrate this. I call it the digital dictatorship. How every seed is being taken over by Bill Gates. Agriculture, including in Latin America, is becoming part of one agriculture under him. This is that localization that elevates itself to the global, one monoculture of the mind. And this is a mind that cannot see alternatives. It cannot see how people have their system. Worst, it cannot see the destruction it's causing. The idea that you'll have farming without farmers, which he's pushing in a very, very big way, which is what One Ag is about. Digital agriculture, farming without farmers, more drones to spray more Roundup, but except a little calculation. Yeah, it's robbing us of our minds. We are the new mind. Our bodies and our minds are the new mind. Data is being mined from us. And when they talk about big data is the new oil, I say, shouldn't we look at what the old oil did to see what this new oil could do to us? So as change makers, you need to look at not just what are the possibilities of creating a different world, but also the extension of the old colonial system with new tools. Yeah, Christianity was there. Then money making came, and now technology as money making has come. It's a new religion. We really need to find ways to defend our freedoms, to find from the grassroots up. How will we continue to grow our food, but how will we also deal with our systems that are being hijacked in front of our eyes? And now is the time for a global unity. The work is local, but the solidarity is global. And when I talk about Earth Democracy, which is another book I've written, I always say Earth democracy, A, makes it possible to see yourselves as part of one Earth community. But the second thing it does is that it allows you to both be part of place, your particular place, your community, as well as part of the planet. Because the Earth doesn't say I'm global or local. The Earth is multiple levels. The Earth is local and global. The Earth is the planet and the soil under our feet. And basically, at the end of the day, what we are facing is the old colonial Cartesian paradigm being pushed with very violent tools and very, very brutal exclusions of most of humanity. The Zuckerbergs and others talk about 99% humanity being useless people. We cannot accept that. If people fought against slavery in the past, we now have to fight against being treated as useless people. No species is a waste. That's why monocultures of the mind. No person is useless. That's why the creation of new living economies, new living democracies, new living cultures.
The next and final question comes from one of our changemakers in Peru, Joaquin Leguia. Joaquin founded ANIA, the Association for Children and the Environment. I will read his question to you. We believe it's crucial for humanity that every children grow practicing empathy, the ability to prioritize the common good through daily actions that generate well-being oneself, other people, and the nature. To that end, we believe Mother Earth should be herself a teacher in every school. She should have her own nature classroom to aid the human teachers raise children with a good heart. Dr. Shiva, you have created Navdanya and the Earth University, where you say the best teacher is nature herself. What recommendations would you have for Joaquin Leguia in Peru?
Well, first of all, my love and admiration that, I've spent lifetime coming to this point, and you are already working with children about nature as teacher. And you talk about nature's classrooms. We can, even in urban schools, create nature's classrooms by starting a garden. This is my dream, that this earth should become a garden everywhere, rather than a war zone everywhere. And a garden of can be an amazing teacher from the earth, but it can also be an amazing teacher of science, of physics, of geology, of biology, of your indigenous cultures with the seed. But I find, in all these years, my 5 decades, learning from nature, you can just be a recipient. But the most important point is love for nature. The empathy that you talk about has to be turned into action. So it has to be empathic action, compassionate action, with the recognition that 500 years of colonialism has totally brutalized indigenous cultures and brutalized the earth. The earth is inviting us to join hands with her, to heal her. And I think more and more that while the big tech giants and the billionaires who steal in new ways through collections of rents and mining our data, the earth is saying, come. You are part of me, you're part of my earth family, you're part of my earth community. And she's given us a body with a head and a heart and hands. And in this integrity of our beautiful being as part of the earth's children, the one thing we owe her is gratitude, is giving back, is healing. And that's where the garden becomes a teacher. How do you give back? How do you obey the law of return? And in the process, see a seed become 1,000 seeds. Soil organisms burst. Good fruit and good food for you. Abundance becomes your teacher. The 1% creates an idea of a scarcity, of hopelessness, of fear. The earth creates the lesson of abundance, of hope, of resilience, of love, and as you're saying, empathy and compassion. All my love to all of you and all strength for a time where there will be brutal attacks, but also a time where small actions by the smallest person can have huge impact for the planet and your future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. This was a fascinating, inspirational conversation, and we appreciate you opening the time for us. In the name of Changemakers United, I want to thank you for joining us online, and I do hope some of us will see you in person in the near future and experience Navidania classes, teachings.
I will just add, the Changemakers should go to the web page of Navdanya to see the courses we offer of returning to the earth. And so please do. I hope we'll interact this way and then another time physically. Thank you.
Allow us to stay in touch. Shukriya, Dr. Vandana Shiva. Thank you all. Muchas gracias. Obrigada a todos vocês. Back to you, Alfonso.